Hi and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Flo and today's video is a January reading wrap up. I have had a up and down month in terms of reading. I've had some of the worst books I've read and then some of my new favorite books that I've read. But before we get started, apologies if the lighting is funny. It is storming so bad outside today. It is such a gloomy day in London. And also to top off this bad day, before I filmed this video, I was out and about and a bus literally drove over a pot of yogurt and it went all over me. So today isn't a great day and it's not going in my favour. So what better way to cheer me up than to talk about the books that I've read this month. And as always, as you know, my month reading wrap up slightly overlaps the month before because the time it takes me to upload this and edit it with a job, I sort of end up talking about the last week of December and then sort of the third week to the penultimate week in January, whatever the right phrasing is. You get what I mean, but it's a month of reading, covers the most of January. So this is the books that I have read pretty much for January. We've still got a few more days to go, but I will add those into next month's reading wrap up. So to start off strong, I continued reading the Simple Wild series. So I read Wild at Heart and then I also read the novella, which I think goes between these two books, or does it go at the end of this book? I can't remember now. How bad is that? But that book / novella is called Forever Wild, and I rated both of these 5 stars. As you know from another reading vlog I did, which is the TikTok For You page picks my next read, I read The Simple Wild in that and I fell in love with it. I think I also mentioned in my December reading wrap up as well, when I talked about that book, I was like, I am going to be running to finish this series, and I did. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. Not much to really add from The Simple Wild in terms of like my enjoyment and my thoughts, but it basically continues Jonah and Carla's story. So Carla moves to Alaska to reconnect with her dad, ends up falling in love with the pilot Jonah. She decides to move out there, and so the second and the third, or like the second and the novella book, is sort of her finding her feet in Alaska because she grew up in Canada, and it's how their relationship is tested as she makes that adjustment. But overall, really enjoyable, super easy plot, wintry feels because obviously Alaska. So I would definitely recommend that if you want sort of like a small town comfort read set in wintry months, as we are still in the worst months of winter where it's dark and it's cold all the time. So if you want to like really get in those feels, I would definitely recommend this series. And then the next book that I read was Checkmate by Ali Hazelwood. This is her debut YA novel and I gave it 5 stars. I loved this book. It was really nice, light read, and as the title suggests, it's kind of centered around chess, and it follows a girl called Mallory, and she's just finished high school, but she sort of is the main breadwinner, like income provider for her family, because her mum is unwell and she's got 2 young siblings. So she decides not to go to college and she works in a car engineering company, like a car shop. I don't know the correct phrase there, but she used to play chess, but then she lost her dad, and so during that sort of stopped her playing chess ever again. And the story goes into more detail with that. I won't spoil it, but she stops playing chess, but she was such a promising young player that she then ends up doing like a charity tournament because her best friend convinces her to do it, and she beats like the world champion called Nolan. And during that she gets scouted, and this woman offers her sort of a apprenticeship scheme, I would call it, through that. So she gets paid to play chess and then to sort of enter all of these different tournaments, and she keeps it a secret from her family. So there's lots of twists and turns and different plot points within this book, and for a YA novel, I was gripped. It was so good. I just really like this book. When I first started reading Ali Hazelwood, I wasn't that bothered by her. What book was it? I have them here now. Yeah, The Love Hypothesis. I wasn't really that bothered. I think I gave it 3 stars, and then I listened to Love on the Brain and I enjoyed that more. But then the ones I've read recently, I've been really enjoying. Checkmate is definitely my favorite, and I would say it's worth the hype. It's such a lovely story. So many emotions in it as well. You get sad at one point and then you're laughing at another point. And I love all of the contemporary jokey references she makes to some pop culture that we would experience like on TikTok and things like that. So I really loved this. 5 stars, would highly recommend. And then I've done a whole reading vlog on this, which I will tag now, so I won't go into it too much, but I read The Scarlet Princess, which I think is actually another YA, but a fantasy novel, and it's part of the Lachlan Feud series. It's the first book. I read this in an entire day and I gave it 4 stars. The reason that I didn't give it 5 was I think there were parts where I felt like I was having to read it. I mean, I was doing it in a read a book in a day challenge, so obviously I would force myself to read at points when I didn't want to, so maybe that added to my level of not full enjoyment. But the story was good. It follows a princess called Rowan who ends up going between these 2 areas. Like, I think she basically trespasses and she gets captured by the enemy territory, and then she has to go somewhere for her fate to be decided, because the crime that she committed is it punishable by a capital punishment, something like that. But anyway, you get sentenced to death, but because she was a princess, they had to like all come together to decide her fate. There's a huge plot twist at the end of this book which made me rate it higher than I think I would have had that not occurred, and it was good. I've just not been running to get to the next book, so yeah, if you want my full thoughts and live reactions on that, go check out my reading vlog. But other than that, 4 out of 5 stars, first book in a series. Not dying to continue it, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. And then I read another Ali Hazelwood book because I loved Checkmate so much that I wanted to listen to another one. I listened to this on audiobook, and I find her books so easy to read, and I'm definitely converted into loving her. I wasn't convinced before, like I mentioned, but yeah, really loved this book. I rated it 4 out of 5 stars. It follows a girl called Elsie, and I guess the tropes for the romance element is enemies to lovers, rivals, that sort of vibe. But essentially, she is a physicist. The current job she has doesn't pay that well, and so she has a side hustle where she is a fake girlfriend to people, and she ends up being hired to date this guy, and I can't remember his name now, but she ends up fake dating him, and like she meets his family. She's paid by this guy to be the fake girlfriend so that his family stop pestering him to date and like settle down and things like that. So that ends, and then she ends up applying for this new physicist job at MIT, and there she meets Jack, who is the brother of the guy she was fake dating, and he's like, wait, are you conning MIT? When she was fake dating the guy, she said that her job was a librarian, and now he's like, what the hell, like, why do you have this undercover story? Are you cheating on my brother, or are you lying to my brother? Like, he's very protective of his brother because he still thinks that they're together. Anyway, it's a whole thing. But Jack and Elsie are also rivals because Elsie is a theoretical scientist, whereas Jack is an experimentalist. And the book goes into the context of that and sort of how there's a rivalry between those 2 areas in the science or STEM profession. I feel like this book, like Checkmate, is very multifaceted and has so many different small and large plot points that make it really enjoyable, and it's so funny, and again, loads of modern contemporary jokes and TikTok references and things like that which just make you laugh. And it was really lighthearted. It was exactly what I wanted to listen to. It was so easy to read on audiobook, so I really enjoyed this, and I would highly recommend reading it. Okay, so we're back on to talking about Pucking Around, and I mentioned it in my December reading wrap up because I was reading it, and as you can tell, it's a bloody thick book, isn't it? Like, it's so big. How many pages is this? For a hockey romance, might I add. Over 700 pages for a hockey romance. So it's no wonder I was talking about it in December and then I didn't finish it till January. I rated this 2 out of 5 stars. It was just way too smutty. I didn't like the tropes. Some people love this book, they rave about it, they love the smut, they love the different areas of romance, and it's a plot that you've never seen before, and that is great for them. But there was just too much smut in it for me to really enjoy it. I was listening to it on audiobook, as I mentioned, and I just didn't feel comfortable enough reading it at home with my family and then at work. So I've only been picking this up when I've been going for a dog walk by myself. So yeah, just too much smut for me. Not enough focus on the plot. So yeah, 2 out of 5 stars. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you love hockey romance, you love smut, you love a bit of a unique plot, then go ahead, read this. I would really recommend it if that's your kind of thing. The next book I read was Love Redesigned by Lauren Asher. I actually have a physical copy of this book, but I left it at my parents' house. But I rated this 3 out of 5 stars. I thought for me that Lauren Asher would be like a household name for me, or like a go-to author. Anything she writes, she'll read. And I still think that's the case, but I have really started to go off of her writing a bit. I find it too cringe, and I find some of the dialogue isn't very realistic, but it's a hard one for me because I loved Throttled and I really loved the Dreamland Billionaire series, and then Love Redesigned is kind of, it's set in the same town that the third book in the Dreamland Billionaires series is set in. So I loved that element, and I thought I would love it way more than I did. Like Sarah Caroli did a video and she rated it, I think 5 out of 5 stars or 4 to 5 stars. She loved it and said it was one of Lauren Asher's best. But for me, I just think once I started to pick up on the dodgy dialogue and the cringy sentences and writing, I can't then look away from that. It's like once you notice something, it's hard not to unnotice it. So I think I've really gone off of her writing, which makes me really sad. But the story is really cute, and it is one that I probably would have preferred to have read on audiobook instead of on my Kindle, which is what I did. I think it would have been a really good audiobook, and I think I prefer higher levels of plot in books that I actually sit down and read. But it follows Dahlia and Julian. So they were childhood friends. They kind of basically grew up as family, but they're not related, obviously, because that would be quite weird. But Dahlia moves away and she ends up getting engaged. So she goes to Stanford for uni. So does Julian. Like, they're best friends. They go to uni together. They start exploring a relationship, and then Julian's dad passes away. So he goes back to Lake Wisteria, whereas Dahlia stays in Stanford, and then she ends up getting into a relationship with Julian's roommate, and then they get engaged, but he turns out to be a bit of an asshole, etc, etc. So they break off their engagement. She moves back to Lake Wisteria for a bit of a break. She is an interior designer, and then he is a construction worker. He takes over his dad's business, and so they end up working together on a project, and it's about how they end up becoming, they were friends, not to enemies, but to like, maybe they are supposed to be enemies, but they obviously have fallen out. Like, their relationship ended really badly when Julian's dad died. And so they end up going back from friends to enemies to friends to lovers type situation. But yeah, it just wasn't, I just didn't love it. But it was a cute story, easy plot. If you want an easy listen, Lauren Asher is such a solid book recommendation. I'm just sad I've started to go off her, and I don't know why. It makes me sad that I don't love it and I can't look through the unrealistic dialogue, but it is what it is. I'm sad, but hopefully this is obviously the first book in another series of hers, so hopefully I can keep reading it and I fall back in love with her as an author, because it would be a shame if not. So the next book I read was I Am Pilgrim by Terry Hayes, and very rogue for me, but this is a crime book. I read this ages ago. I'm talking like 4 or 5 years ago. His new book is out, and I actually thought that it was a sequel to this book 11 years later. I have bought it thinking that, and then no. It's actually just a completely different book. It just took him a while to write another one. Anyway, that's what happens when you just like don't actually look at the blurb or look at anything about the book before you just order it. But you know, I'm still going to read it because I rated this book 5 stars. I loved this book. It is very thick. It took me a while to get into it at first, and I think that's quite a common theme amongst some of my friends that have read it as well. But this is such a staple in one of the books that I always recommend to people, and I kept my rating from previously, like even though I knew what was happening, because this is a reread of a crime book that has a lot of twists and turns and you need to guess things. I obviously knew them before I went into it, but I still would hold my 5-star rating. It's one of these books that my granddad has read it, my dad has read it, I have read it, my friends have read it, and just cross-generationally, cross-gender, cross-different book interests, we've all really enjoyed it. It does have a lot of different unique plot points. Some are quite convenient. There are some plot points where it's like, oh, well, that's convenient that that was the case. And what would really be the odds in real life? Although, like, what would be the odds in real life anyway for a book like this? I don't know. But there's an undercover guy, his code name is Pilgrim, and he has been sent on a mission by the top powers in the US. So he deals with the president directly to find this guy that they've codenamed the Saracen, because he is going to commit a really bad crime against humanity, and it's a terrorist act. And so this book is Pilgrim going on a mission and finding the Saracen, and he has to go to Turkey and is an undercover, like pretending to be an FBI agent whilst trying to uncover this massive terrorist act and crime, whilst also actually trying to solve this other FBI crime, which is really cool. So yeah, there's 2 elements of this book, 2 different mysteries, and I really enjoyed it. I think the writing was really good. Like I said, it's a bit slow to get into, but I think because there's quite a lot of different plot points, the author has to go into them and do them justice. So I would recommend this. I would actually recommend this book to anybody. This would be always one of the books that I would recommend, because I think it was one of the first books that I read 5 years ago that just reminded me how much I love reading. Like, I read this on the tube to and from work constantly when I was living in London, and it was just nice reading it again and being really nostalgic over that, because I was reading it on the tube again, and it's just really nice diving back into that and just remembering those times. I know that sounds really, really silly, but yeah, it's very nostalgic to me. And so yeah, loved this book. 5 stars. So the next books I read were books 3 and 4 in the Magnolia Parks series. I kept saying that I wanted to get to these books. I adored both of them. I gave them both 5 stars, but I will go into greater detail as to each one now. So it pivots. So Jessa Hastings is the author. So she did, the first book was Magnolia Parks' book. The second book was Daisy Hates. The third book is Magnolia Parks' perspective again. And then the 4th is Daisy Hates. So let's talk about the third book, which was Magnolia Parks. And what was it called? I actually can't remember the name of the third book of the Magnolia Parks series. But anyway, it's the third book in the series and it's from Magnolia Parks' perspective. And I didn't love the first book. I think I rated it 3 stars. I found it very toxic. The relationship between Magnolia and BJ was very on again, off again. It does give Gossip Girl. That's the whole thing about this series, is it's giving Gossip Girl, but in a London setting. But the relationship was toxic, and this third book kind of explores that. So to give a background to the whole Magnolia Parks universe, Magnolia Parks is the main character, and she has a circle of friends. They're all from very privileged backgrounds, but some of them are from like crime mafia-y type backgrounds, or the UK version, maybe a gang. They are from very different, unique, but very wealthy backgrounds, and you see like they go to a lot of these different fancy places in London, which really inspires you to go and visit them. As someone that lives in London, it's pretty cool when Jessa talks about some of the bars or like the private members clubs that actually exist in London. And I've been to some of the places, like she mentioned Sketch and things like that, and I just love picturing them because I've been there myself. So it makes me just love being in London. And I remember saying like in a couple of videos that I've been very homesick for Bristol and I haven't been loving London. Weirdly, these books really helped me get back into London and love London. And I've wanted to go to all these different places. And when I go to bars, I always order the drink that Magnolia ordered, which is a French 75. I honestly owe these books a lot in terms of twisting my mindset to being more positive about living in London. I really struggled at the end of last year because of the cost of living crisis. And I think when I see all these different places in the books, and like Jessa just does them so much justice, I then go and visit them, and it just makes me love London more. I know that sounds really silly, but you know, in a book, I just became absorbed in the world, and it made me feel like I was one of them. Obviously not, I don't have the bank balance, but it just really helped me feel more at home in London. And I'm so grateful for this book series for that, as lame as that sounds. But this third book is Magnolia Parks' perspective. And just like the first book, I gave this book 5 stars, but I still felt that the relationship between BJ and Magnolia was so toxic, and you just wanted to bang the main characters' heads together to be like, sort your shit out. But I was discussing this with my friend and I was like, I don't know if that means I loved it or I hated it, because I was getting so aggravated by the characters. And she said to me, she was like, well, actually, if a book can bring that emotion out of you where you feel like these characters are real, you feel like you can picture yourself in these places and you're getting annoyed for them and you recognize their character flaws, doesn't that mean you loved it? Because if Jessa has the ability in her writing to make you feel that deeply about fictional characters, that is so impressive. And also, she's just showing that these characters are extremely flawed for various different background reasons that they have, the relationship with each other, the trauma that they went through together. So yeah, I completely agree with that, and that's why I gave it 5 stars. The romance in it is toxic. It's very on again, off again relationship, but you uncover a bit more of the reasons as to why BJ and Magnolia keep finding their way back together. They were like school sweethearts, and then you see some of their past stories as well, and how they use sort of relationships with other people as a crutch to deal with the relationship breakdown between the pair of them. I just loved that for how it made me feel, even though I was pretty irritated, but I think that that's such a unique thing to be able to get that out of a book, if that makes any sense. Just like words on pages make you feel annoyed, or even make you comfortable enough in the city that you live in. Like, that deserves 5 stars. And then the Daisy Hates book, I loved the second book, and this book is a continuation of Daisy's story and Christian's story, and I loved that. It's a lot less toxic than BJ and Magnolia, so it gives you a bit of a break from that, but also interweaves it at the same time. So Christian grows up in sort of a gang family, so does Daisy. Daisy's brother Julian is like high crime lord in London, and Daisy was trying to run away from that life. She wanted a normal life, and it's kind of, this book explores how you can never really get away from it, and also explores how Daisy and Christian navigate their relationship. But it also has the perspective of Julian as well, which I loved, and it kept it really interesting. But overall, loved this series. Jess's writing is so great. I think it shows the flaws in characters, and it gives sort of a realistic perspective of on again, off again relationships, and how things aren't always as black and white and as simple as some people like to make out. Like, you know, when you get friends that give you relationship advice and they're like, never get back with an ex, or things like that. This kind of shows you that actually there's not always a one size fits all approach to relationships. But yeah, I will be continuing to order French 75s in bars, and I will continue to try and go to as many of the restaurants within price range that I can afford that are featured in this book. And I'm so excited for the 5th book in this series. So yeah, I loved both of these books. 5 stars. And then we have my first DNF of the year, which was the Atlas 6. And I love that in so many of these vlogs I've been like, oh, I want to go to Waterstones and buy the paperback copy, because the front cover of the book is so pretty and everyone hypes the book up and everybody talks about it. So I was like, I've got it on Kindle, but I know I'm gonna love it, so it's all good. I really did not love it, and I'm so sad about that. I couldn't really follow it. I got quite bored of the plot, and I couldn't even really tell you much about the plot. I DNF'd it at 45%. That is good going. I just couldn't get into the plot. It follows 6 characters, and the perspectives constantly change, and you don't really like the names. I would get mixed up in people because it would flip, and then also the chapters were so long. Each one was averaging like 30 minutes a chapter on Kindle, because it tells you how long it would take you to read it. So what's that, like 30 something pages? No, I couldn't do it. It was just maybe too highbrow for me. I always say this, I love like a easy plot, but yeah, I couldn't really, like I said, I couldn't really tell you much about it, as you can tell. It just was not great. I think these are just 6 characters that have been selected by this guy called Atlas to go to this sort of underground world. If you've read this book and you love it, you're probably listening to this and you're like, you are absolutely botching the description of this book. So if you like fantasy, it was a bit too complex for me and I got a little bit bored. But if you love fantasy, go check it out for yourself. Don't just base it on my recommendation, because obviously everybody's enjoyment of different genres and plot types and stories, each to their own, you know. Don't get put off by me. Just because I didn't enjoy it doesn't mean that you won't. Go check out the blurb, go check out some reviews on Goodreads, non-spoilers, and see if you'd like it yourself. It will be added. I will talk about it as a book. I want to do a video on getting into fantasy, because that is something I've recently started to do. So if I can help people and give people pointers into what books I would recommend, which ones I'd maybe say to start later down the line, that will get included. So I will talk about that in more detail in a later video. And then the final book is If We Ever Meet Again by Anna Huang, and I am still reading this book, but I'm only like, I think, yeah, I'm on chapter 35, so I've only got this much left, so I will be finishing this today. I'm listening to it in audiobook. It's very small. I absolutely adored her Twisted series. I loved that. Apart from Twisted Hate, I didn't love, but Twisted Lies and also Twisted Games are like my OG book recommendations. I loved them. They were one of the first book series that I got into when I fully like took off in my like TikTok book obsession. These were one of the books that helped me read so much more than what I used to. But this series, I don't know if she wrote this before the Twisted Love series or not, but I really haven't been enjoying this book. I would say it's between 2 to 3 stars at the moment. I will be thinking about it and fully deciding today. But it follows Blake and Farah. So Blake is a ex-football star and he's American, and then Farah is a design student, and they both go to Shanghai for the year. They meet, they fall in love, but it's very like stereotypical. Like the dad wants Blake to get back into football, and he's a very helicopter parent, and then Farah's like this good girl virgin, and it's kind of how they fall in love. And then the plot twists at the end, like it was just about their like love story and how they're meeting in Shanghai, and the whole like, oh, will it work when we leave, like when we go back to America, because she lives in LA and he lives in Texas, and his dad doesn't want him to move anywhere else. Like his mum and dad are very much like, you're coming back to Texas, you're becoming a footballer. And then Farah's like, well, I'm gonna do design in LA. But then like you get to about 3/4 of the way through this book, and then there's a plot twist, and it's very tropey, and it's the worst trope, one of the worst tropes, two of the worst tropes actually, molded into one. And it's very predictable, and I was just like rolling my eyes the whole time. I'm listening to it in audiobook, so yeah, it's good to listen to an audiobook because you don't have to pay much attention to it. Like I think I spaced out for about 1/4 of this book in the 2nd quarter when I was at work. I was listening to it while I was working, and I kind of just like phased it out, which again is a sign that I'm not enjoying it. So nothing new in this book. Disappointing. So between 2 and 3 stars. So that wraps up the 12 books that I read this month in January. I have had such a mixture, haven't I? Like I've given some that I absolutely loved more towards the beginning of the month, and then I haven't had so much luck towards the end of the month. But 12 books is pretty on average for me, so I'm very happy with that. Let me know if you've read any of these books, and if you either completely agree or disagree with my reviews or my thoughts, or if you had a different opinion, let me know in the comments. I'd love to discuss these books with you, and I'd love to find some more book besties that have read similar books to me. So let me know if you've read any of these, and thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.